I'm so honored to be back here in my father's rightful place, Reverend Jesse Jackson. We thank our president, Reverend Frederick Haynes, and always a delight to be in the company with my great mother, activist, freedom fighter, Jacqueline Jackson. Would you give her a round of applause? To our very special guests, and I really do enjoy seeing you year after year, class after class, Spring Arbor, Michigan. I know you had to get up early this morning, which means you couldn't go out late last night. And the Christian ethos and the commitment that your university has towards social justice, I really, really appreciate it. Let's give our guests, and I can't call them guests because they're here every year, season after season, Spring Arbor. We love and appreciate you so much. And to Dr. Iwa, our friend, our communicator, our Pan-African brother that brings the diaspora together, that has brought our colleagues together from Ghana, welcome and thank you for coming out. And to breast cancer, my aunt, my mother's sister died of breast cancer. Our early detection will help us all. We absolutely encourage you, please get the early detection. Early detection saves lives, and this is a dreaded disease that kills so many families unnecessarily. I'd like to share with you just an update on some things that are happening in Washington, D.C. And what's been on my mind scripturally is, blessed are the peacemakers. Not the peacekeepers, but the peacemakers, those that are willing to jeopardize themselves to take the fury of the heat of criticism when the fans of war are flaming, when the gunboats are moving towards the shores, when people have revenge in their eyes and they're burying their loved ones and there's hate and anger. Somewhere, Hebrews teaches us and Matthews, blessed are the peacemakers, those that are willing to reconcile our relationship with brothers and sisters with one another. Three things. One, as it relates to congressional business, we do not have a Speaker of the House of the United States of America after 17 days. Now, what does this really mean? The Speaker of the House is second in succession to the presidency of the United States of America. If the president and vice president were to take a detour and we could not find them, the Speaker of the House, the co-equal branch of government in the House of Representatives, the legislature, assigns the Speaker of the House. We do not currently have a Speaker of the House. So what does that mean? We are in charge of the fiscal allotment of capital, raising the debt ceiling and making appropriations on what gets funded. We averted a cliff in May by raising the debt ceiling so we would not default on the United States sovereign credit, our full faith and goodwill of backing financial instruments. We've never done that since the country was founded. We were on the brink within 48 hours of defaulting on raising the debt ceiling in May of 2023. The Republican caucus was so angry with Speaker of the House McCarthy for doing the right thing, making sure we did not go into default, that they told him, come the fall in September, when we go through appropriations and allocate the funds, renege on your deal and retrade the deal and take the money back out and have cuts. And now they do this in very, very slick and very sophisticated ways. When they say, I am a fiscal hawk, I am conservative, I don't want to spend any more money, except for in the military. Everything else we should talk about line item by line item, except for in Social Security, except for in Medicare. These are the programs that should be cut, but leave the defense budget alone. Although the Defense Department has gone through 5 audits and has never passed one, they don't want to look into what's happening in the defense budget and reckless spending. They want to cut things that affect the backs of poor people. Social Security, the Medicare, and also the SNAP program. I have the honor of serving for you on the House Agricultural Committee. This year is a farm funding bill. This happens every 5 years. This is the second largest bill outside of the defense contracting. This is going to be $1.5, $1.6 $1 trillion, trillion with a T. All cities in America that have a population under 50,000 are under the auspices, jurisdiction of getting federal funds from the Department of Agriculture. And that deals with some of everything, from forestation, from broadband, from crop insurance, all the way over to the SNAP and the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program that affects women and children. They simply want to target cutting the money for women and children to be fed. In the wealthiest, greatest nation on earth, we are in Washington, D.C., fighting about whether or not we should have cuts to the food program. There are college students, better than 2 million college students qualify for food assistance. Our nation has the money, has the resources. We've been blessed with this fertile soil, this fertile land. We can export food, and don't tell me we cannot afford to feed American citizens in our own country. Economically, it's feasible. There's a multiplier effect. For every dollar that is spent in the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, $1.6 trillion, $1.6 is going into a multiplier and accelerator. Meaning if you're looking at it as a function and as a derivative, other companies make money. Only 16 cents out of a dollar goes back to the farmer. That other 84 cents is cycled within the economy, meaning the truckers, meaning those that are the packagers, meaning those that are the grocers, meaning those that are the consumers. Everyone makes money when we put money into the SNAP program. So you will have more updates once we get our house in order and resume business. Unlike what happened in January, when our leader, Hakeem Jeffries, was being nominated and Speaker McCarthy was being nominated. The difference now is there was no time pressure to get the Speaker elected in January, from January 3rd to January 7th. Now, if you will, we're under the shot clock. The time ticker is on. We have a hard date with destiny on November 17th. If we do not, then many programs will cease to be funded and you will see a government shutdown. So after 17 days without a speaker, and by the way, we have now gone 234 years without ever having been in this position before. The nation has never been here in 234 years. And as opposed to us being in Washington, figuring this out and having our discussions in our caucuses, they've dismissed us for the weekend until Monday, and they're playing a very cruel game. I've never liked the circus act where they throw knives at people spinning on the wheel. I've never liked seeing people juggle with knives. It always seems like it's something risky. But that is what we're doing right now in Washington, D.C. That's part one. Part two, there is a growing concern, heightened awareness all over the world on what is happening with Gaza and in Israel. We are now fighting wars on several fronts. We are funding a fight in the Ukraine. The United States Congress is going to reconvene. The President of the United States is asking members of the Congress to authorize $106 billion in additional funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for Taiwan. These numbers are staggering. Can you imagine if we had followed simply our former chair of the House Financial Services and Housing Department, Congresswoman Maxine Waters? She requested $150 billion when they passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Had we funded her request for $150 billion in affordable housing, can you believe we would not have a housing problem in America today? She had the solution. And as soon as we get back to Washington, we are going to reintroduce that legislation. If we can find money to help our allies and send money all over the world, we can bring some money right back home to help our own homeless in our country. What's happening in Israel and Gaza? We have to choose, like the Pope has recently said, the side of peace. Blessed are the peacemakers is what we are instructed to do. When African Americans had long endured 400 years of slavery, no one told us to pick up arms and seek vengeance amongst those that enslaved and those that had brutalized African bodies. When Nelson Mandela has spent 27 years in jail and was called a terrorist. Why? Because they were part of a majority culture that was being controlled by a minority culture, and they did not have the right to vote. Him fighting for the right to vote, he was called a terrorist, and that was supported in policy by the United States government. But after he was released, he and the former President de Klerk both received a Nobel Peace Prize. They had reconciled and they had gone forward together. No one told South Africans to pick up arms to avenge the death of those who perpetrated this violence. This happened in our lifetime. This last month, in the month of September, I had the opportunity to go with AIPAC and the Congressional Black Caucus to Israel. And they also took us to Rwanda, where I had a magnificent opportunity to see what had happened there in the face of such tragedy. And let me tell you, you could feel the tensions rising. Reverend Martin Luther King told us, peace is not the absence of noise. Peace is the presence of justice. You can't have people on a strip of land 25 miles long, 5 miles at its shortest width, 7.5 miles at its greatest length, 2.3 million Palestinian people stacked on top of each other without a future, 70% youth unemployment. We have to make sure that there's a two-state solution. We have to start with the end in mind on how do we get towards peace. Some people want to have vengeance. And I've shared with my other colleagues on the floor, and some of them are very upset with me right now. I said I have to be pro-peace. I don't want to see an Israeli child coming out of the military going into harm's way. I don't know what sort of IED roadside bombs are going to be planted in Gaza. I don't want to see another Palestinian child in his mother's arms being running down the street. I want to choose pro-peace. This past week, I had to do something that kept me up the greater part of the night. When you go to a funeral service and you go to a repast of a 6-year-old child that was stabbed to death because someone listening to toxic information ends up internalizing it. This 72-year-old man, a landlord that played with this 6-year-old Palestinian child, after enough of the toxicity in this news media, he felt compelled to stab up a 6-year-old child. Ladies and gentlemen, if we aren't the peacemakers, this is the beginning of the end, not the end of the beginning. This thing can spread and metastasize. If you look at the Palestinian population now, it's 2 million people in Jordan, 500,000 people between Syria and Lebanon, another 100,000 people in Egypt, 2.5 million people in the Gaza. They have already been displaced. What's the long-term solution, I ask my friends? After you tell 1 million people you've got 1 day, 24 hours to get out of town, you tell 1 million people that you've got 1 week now to leave town, and we've sent leaflets and other people are holding you hostage. Well, if you know Hamas is a terrorist organization and they aren't, and the Palestinian people aren't Hamas, you can separate the two. You can't go in and attack civilians when they have no place to go. When they say they ought to go to Egypt, why would they go to Egypt when they have a home? And if you go to Egypt, what says you can come back? Ladies and gentlemen, I know the feeling of anger, but this is not where friends would let friends go. America has a very special relationship with Israel. And I told the media the other day, when you have a special relationship, when you have a special friendship, you're able to talk to your friends and tell them things that they may not want to hear. When you're a special friend, you can talk people off of a cliff. There was a vote the other day in the United Nations. All of the nations of the world said have an immediate ceasefire. The United States was the only nation to veto that. The United Nations Secretary General has asked for a ceasefire so we can bring humanitarian goods in. The Pope has said, choose the side of peace. There are many of us in the caucus that are saying, let's give peace a chance. We're going to be calling on you to help. And in closing, I want to talk about some recent comments I've made about the migrant crisis here in Chicago. The migrant crisis, and the Bible has a lot to tell us about the least, the lost, the refugees, the strangers, all one. And but for the grace of God, you and I could be in the same condition. I've been bothered all summer long about seeing this flood of people coming in here without work permits, and children that are unaccompanied, and children that are with, I believe, some dubious persons that say they're their aunties and I'm his uncle, and no one has any paperwork. Like, come on, what exactly is going on here? And we know from our own experience in the foster care system, that has been the portal towards prostitution and degradation. Follow me. Caracas, Venezuela is 2,499 miles drive or walk from Chicago, Illinois. This is one contiguous landmass. You can drive from Chicago to Mexico. You can drive from Mexico all the way down through the Pan American Highway, all the way through Colombia and on to Venezuela. You do not need to fly to Venezuela. You do not need to take a boat to Venezuela. It's a contiguous landmass. The United States has had a boycott and a sanction on the country of Venezuela for the last 15 years. And the strategy was to make sure that we punish the people so they would turn on their leader. They have suffered the consequence of 3 Great Depressions in the last 15 years. In the last act after the boycott, President Bush put in the sanctions to further the screws. Almost 7 million people have been displaced in Venezuela. People have to survive. So every time they leave the country, as opposed to their bordering country, as opposed to harboring them, they say, we don't have a problem with Venezuela. No other country in the world has a problem with Venezuela, except for the United States of America. So they gather up all the refugees, move them to the next border country, move them to the next border country, all the way up to the Mexican border, and say, you all ought to go to America for the people that are kicking you out of your country. So these people don't want to be here, but the economic conditions are so onerous that they cannot stay at home. So Governor Greg Abbott created this program, Operation Lone Star. He's got some FEMA money and some state money, and then he says, I'm going to start targeting places that have called themselves sanctuary cities. So he started sending people, unaccompanied minors, into Denver. Then he started sending them into Chicago. After Chicago was recognized as being the recipient for the 2024 Democratic Convention, he started accelerating the buses. Then he sent them on to Washington, Philadelphia, New York, and on to Boston, using state and federal funds to ship, transport, aid, abet minors going across state lines. So I've gone past these places many times, and now I've begun to see the prostitution rings begun to creep up in the neighborhood. And now some of the persons that aren't so nice are infiltrating those groups that want to do drug dealing. This is now becoming a humanitarian crisis. We have an orderly process to bring people in this country. Once you come in and you seek to be an asylum seeker, you fill out your paperwork, you can get inoculation, you can go into for a pre-trial, then you can get evaluated, you can be reconnected with family. There is a process. But what is Governor Greg Abbott doing? He's picking people up without processing them, making this a joke, making this a war on the poor against the poor, and he's strategically sending people into these areas. I was getting up to take a 6 o'clock flight just 2 weeks ago, and I slept with my windows open, and I woke up way too early at 3 o'clock, and I closed the window, and I looked and said, my goodness, it's gotten cold in Chicago. And it was 32 degrees, almost at the frost point in Chicago 2 weeks ago on a Monday morning. So I couldn't sleep anymore, and after 4 o'clock, I said, let me go over and see what's happening at the 3rd District on 71st and Cottage Grove in my neighborhood, where unfortunately 3 officers had gotten shot because of some fights and some other issues that have started to erupt within the population. And I see people sleeping outside in 30-degree weather in a tent. mothers, babies, children, men, and they've been out there for days and weeks and months now. Inside of the police station, it's overrun, no other place. This isn't fair for our law enforcement officials. They're here to protect us and also solve crime. The role of policing is for detention, actually prevention, and for investigation. Those are the two primary functions of being in the police department: investigation and also prevention of the crime. Making our police stations into homeless shelters is not what police do. Now they're bringing people up and dropping them off. And so I saw one lady, and she says, I'm the auntie. I speak no Spanish. She speaks broken English. And she was saying, I'm the auntie of this child. Mom, she didn't look like that child at all. And I'm like, is this play auntie, like play cousin? And I started seeing a pattern. So I'm like, hold on, like, how does this get verified? You remember the case of Elian Gonzalez? The mother took the child, the Cuban child, out of Florida, and the United States government had to send the Department of Justice in to get the Cuban father's son so he could take him back home. Follow me. You cannot transport people's children across international or state lines without permission and documentation. What do I want in conclusion? I want Operation Lone Star to be shut down permanently. I want these families reunified. This is the work, I tell you, of being a peacemaker. You're not going to be popular, but you do what's just, what's normal, and what's right. Operation Lone Star, I have alleged, could be, possibly, I got to speak very legalistic, a criminal enterprise. I have simply asked the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security to investigate Governor Greg Abbott and the Lone Star operation. Why? I want to know, is there one child under the age of 18 that's been put on that bus?
That's right, just one.
Just one. Did you put one child on that bus? Have you deceived someone into signing some paperwork or giving you a verbal agreement to get on a bus not knowing where they're going? I would imagine many of those border personnel don't speak Spanish, and many of these personnel do not speak English, and they're putting them on buses and shipping them to the four winds all around the nation to come into neighborhoods to get exploited, to get used, to get abused. I'm doing this in the interest of the children. We cannot have children coming from other countries that are here being exploited and being trafficked from one state to the next. In conclusion, Lone Star, according to 8th section, U.S. 1324 Penal Code, you cannot transport, aid, abet, conspire, or profit or deceive people when you transport them. So for the bus company, I know you have a profitable contract. You are aiding and abetting and transporting minors. To the bus driver, I know it's your job. Well, that's a bad job you have. You need to find another one. You are aiding and abetting and transporting minors. What do I want to have happen? I want to see people enforce the law, just that simply. For the bus driver, it's your job, but I want you arrested when you have minors on your bus. If you have not checked the manifest to see who is on there and what is their age, and are they being accompanied with an adult. Give that a round of applause. I want to see the bus and the bus company have their bus impounded. I want the children and the families taken off the bus and treated humanely. They've done nothing wrong. I want those that are conspiring to smuggle and transport women and children unlawfully brought to justice. Some people will say, well, Greg Abbott has a problem in Texas, and You can't create one crime because you have a challenge. You can't put people on buses and children. And someone says, this is unprecedented. I'm like, come on. We all went to public school at some point. And back in the day, we all had to read Oliver Twist.
That's right.
We saw what happened in Europe when you smuggle children. Don't put this as a black person's problem. We've seen what happened with the poor in Europe too. It's the same smuggling enterprise that we want to see stopped all around the world. I don't want to hear about Ukrainian babies being smuggled. I don't want to see people on the auspices of saying they're religious going into Haiti and smuggling out any of those babies. I don't want to see people do it domestically on our own shores. We can end child smuggling today, right now. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming out to Rainbow Push. We need good information. These young people, you all have inspired me. My mother, for your lifetime of work and activism, I thank you. We are the people's organization. When we talk about what's happening in the Ukraine, when we talk about what's happening on our borders, when we talk about what's going to happen in this budget, we are in for the fight of our lives. Everything, it seems like, in Washington, D.C. is going back to the 18 and the 1700s. I shared with you before, when you had the affirmative action case, you ended up citing since 1789, after 234 years, we've never been speakerless. Our president of the Senate, Vice President Kamala Harris, she has now broken records that were set in 1831, 191 years ago, by making the most tie-breaking decisions in American history. This past week, Leader Hakeem Jeffries, having now been nominated 18 times for the Speaker of the House, has now broken a record that stood since the Civil War on having been nominated the most times in American history for the Speaker of the House. When the Supreme Court has cited the 14th Amendment, 1868, when it was ratified to justify overturning protections for African Americans with the affirmative action clause for racial protection and equal justice, they are moving everything backwards in time. That's the big picture. And we're going to work on the minor picture. God bless, and I'll see you next Saturday. Keep the faith.